Hi there. This is Reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Chapter 21. You're not very brave, are you? Chris says. No, I answer, and I pull the rind of a slice of salami between my teeth to remove the meat. But you'd be astonished at how smart I am. Well, we know how smart he is, and I, for one, am astonished. Now, remember in the last chapter, he seems proud of his reluctance to take risks and his passivity, let's just say. And he's not ashamed to admit it. And we kind of react to this like Chris does. You're not very brave. And we're maybe a little bit disdainful because he's not capitalizing on this trip or his relationship with his son. He seems afraid of doing things that maybe his son would like to do and that would, help them bond, like going up to the top of the mountain. He's afraid of something like ghosts. But of course, the other side of it, as we discussed, is that the ghost he's afraid of might be something that, should he meet it, would destroy his life again. And remember, I don't know if I mentioned this, but they were going to give him a lobotomy in the hospital. So with that little tidbit of information, maybe it makes that ghost all the more ominous. So laying low and heading for the valley makes sense in that regard. Chris has resigned himself to the descent and even offers to take some of the heavier stuff that the narrator was carrying, took out of Chris's pack and put in his, in order to stop, Chris's whining, basically. So Chris offers to take some. He can be considerate when he's in the mood, states the narrator. So that's interesting. He can be considerate when he's in the mood. And I like to talk about moods and states. So I was thinking that a lot of spiritual practice is keeping us in the considerate mood, keeping us in the receptive, positive, loving-kindness mood, let's just say. What I want to do now in the Chautauqua is to get away from intellectual abstractions of an extremely general nature and go into some solid, practical, day-to-day information. I'm not quite sure how to go about this. I could be saying the same thing about myself in terms of the Pirsig project. I'm trying to get away from, or I'm trying to figure out how to use this great material in some solid, practical, day-to-day ways that can help our lives. So if he's not sure, but that is what I want to hear. I want to hear that there is potential to do that. One thing about pioneers that you don't hear mentioned is that they are invariably, by their nature, mess makers. They go forging ahead, seeing only their noble, distant goal, and never notice any of the crud and debris they leave behind them. Someone else gets to clean that up, and it's not a very glamorous or interesting job. You have to depress for a while before you can get down to doing it. Then, once you've depressed into a really low-key mood, it isn't all that bad. Okay, there's a couple of things that I notice here. The first is the pioneer archetype, and that could be Phaedrus, who left such a mess that, the archetype is kind of like, venturing forth into the domain that no one has discovered, but invariably there's a mess that gets left behind. You can even look at the hero's journey. There's always some collateral damage. And it might have been such a mess for the narrator that he's actively suppressing anything that resembles that part of himself outside of the intellectual abstractions. So you could also say that a pioneer, that any pioneer is going to leave a mess for others to clean up. Think about the big five stuff that Jordan Peterson talks about. High trait openness types are artists, creative, entrepreneurs. High conscientious types are the managers. And that makes sense. You've got someone who goes and makes a big mess, and then the high conscientious type comes and cleans it up and organizes it. But I think what he's indicating here, what Pirsig's indicating here, is that we have both capacities within us. And indeed, for example, artists who can cultivate their conscientiousness do much better because they don't completely ignore the business side of their trade. And as we know, artists by reputation are not very good business people, and that's why most of them don't make it. I mean, art is a meritocracy to some extent. Creative professions are a meritocracy to some extent, but you have to have that business side, especially in this world. But even before, for example, Van Gogh only became famous after his death. whereas Picasso was actively glad-handing all around Paris and wherever he went. So that low mood, the depressed, he calls it, that's kind of an anathema to a creative type. You know, you've got that visionary flow state experience, and you're not thinking about the mess you're leaving, let's just say. Maybe flow state isn't the right word, but you've got that creative experience. And the depressed state is bringing that down and then cultivating the organized, non-creative side of yourself. What you're going to see in this book is a back and forth between, say, two sides of yourself like that. There's there's the creative side, the romantic side, and the classic side, and we're trying to unite these. And also, there's an implication that we want to unite them within ourselves. And how are we going to do that? We will see that back and forth of these two natures is something that's called for in the implementation of quality, or I would say vice versa. Maybe quality can help us access both sides of ourselves if we can really get in touch with it. To discover a metaphysical relationship with quality in the Buddha at some mountaintop of personal experience is very spectacular and very unimportant. That's an interesting phrase because just look at Zen, you know, let's go back to that phrase. Before Zen, chopping wood and drawing water. After Zen, chopping wood and drawing water. So I think that's where I think that's what he's kind of pointing to. If that were all this Shitaka was about, I should be dismissed. What's important is the relevance of such a discovery to the valleys of the world and to all the dull, dreary jobs and monotonous years that await all of us in them. And this is what I mean when I'm talking about implementing Pirsig's material in the real world, because once you have that mystical experience, let's say, you know, the metaphysical relationship with quality at the Buddha at some mountaintop, you know, the high country of the mind, a mystical experience is spectacular, but how are you going to implement it in the world? So you necessarily have to go down to the valley in order to do that. But what if you're already in the valley and you don't even know the mountain exists? And that is a problem. And you could say that is a meaning crisis. Sylvia knew what she was talking about the first day when she noticed those people coming the other way. What did she call it? A funeral procession. The task is now to get back down to that procession with a wider kind of understanding that exists there now. This is why I think Pirsig is so important. Look what he's saying. He's saying this, 40 years before we're saying it in this corner of the internet. I'm sure, I'm not saying he's the only one, but for me, this guy is the one who's naming the problem and, as we will see, offering a solution. And it's basically what we're doing in this corner of YouTube is trying to figure out an antidote to the dreary dullness of the valley that doesn't know there's a mountain behind it and in front of it. First of all, I should say that I don't know whether Phaedra's claim of quality is the Tao is true. I don't know of any way of testing it for truth, since all he did was simply compare his understanding of one mystic entity with another. He certainly thought they were the same, but he may not have completely understood what quality was, or more likely, he may not have understood the Tao. He certainly was no sage, and there's plenty of advice for sages in that book that he would have done well to heed. I'm going to be using this book now. It's great. I recommend it if you're interested in this material. This book, the guidebook to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, describes the areas of philosophy used in this book and how they relate to Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and it does it in kind of a kind of integrative way, let's just say. I don't know how to explain it, and maybe I'll talk about it more in some other situation, but for the time being, I'm going to say that it's really worth getting. So, De Santo, the philosopher, the guy who writes the philosophy stuff in this book, Ron De Santo, says that Lao Tzu, being, I guess, Eastern, feels like there's too much yang in the world, and there certainly is. So in the section on Taoism, he's saying that the orientation of the Tao Te Ching is to cultivate more yin in self and less yang in society. And there's a great fantasy dialogue between Lao Tzu and the narrator on this issue. So De Santos states that the essence of Lao Tzu's advice is to be natural, is to be your natural self, to accept the harmony of yin and yang within yourself and outside of yourself. I think Tao and quality are very similar, but the difference, I think, is that Tao, within the context of the Tao Te Ching, has a return to nature aspect, whereas quality has a dealing with the world as is aspect. That quality can be used in any circumstance, that there isn't, that the only value is attaching to quality itself, whereas in the Tao Te Ching, it's more returning to nature in a way. And this is this is where the fantasy dialogue goes. The narrator indicated that we can't turn back the clock and we have to find the Tao in technology, Buddha in the gears of a motorcycle. Whereas Lao Tzu would more go along with John and Sylvia on the lines of getting away from this to some extent, maybe dispensing with some of the gadgets we have. Not a bad idea, really. But the narrator responds that, in this fantasy dialogue, he responds that what we need to do is care about what we're doing, and that's where quality comes in. And the whole caring thing, which is critically important, we're going to discuss in later chapters. So maybe Pirsig would, at this point, maybe he would make an exception when it comes to the problem of the cell phone. I don't know. He was alive during the internet, and he communicated a lot with people online. Because people do seem to care inordinately about the virtual worlds that are available to us through our cell phones and through the internet, that might, that he might not have imagined where we were going with this. Remember that Vervaeke stated that this is due to being able to find the essential orders of a full experience of reality within the virtual world, the narrative, the normative, and the nomological. And so it emulates the full experience of reality, but in a very superficial way, although you can care about that because it seems like these virtual worlds seem real in a lot of ways. Lao Tzu states in the fantasy dialogue that the over-yanging of society is too overwhelming, and we're not going to be able to find caring in that. We're going to be reduced to coping. I think that's a pretty good point. The point for both of them is to get back either in touch with Tao for Lao Tzu or quality for Pirsig, and that, of course, ends up being the point: how to get back in touch with quality. Some tips are coming up later, but for now, let's just muse on this for a little bit. The narrator states that the metaphysical mountain climbing did nothing to further the understanding of quality of the Tao. And as he stated earlier, it ended up being an obvious comparison of two conceptions of the mystical experience, and I kind of agree with that. I think, furthermore, that all his metaphysical mountain climbing did nothing to further our understanding of what quality is or what the Tao is. Not a thing. It sounds like an overwhelming rejection of what he thought and said, but it isn't. I think it's a statement he would have agreed with himself, since any description of quality is kind of a definition and must therefore fall short of its mark. I think he might even have said that statements of this kind he had made, which fall short of their mark, are even worse than no statement at all, since they can easily be mistaken for truth and thus retard an understanding of quality. Yes, you can't define quality, but you can't define Tao either. You can compare them, and you can give examples of what is quality and what is Tao. But you can compare them only as apples and apples. If there are two ways of comparing the base mystical experience, then maybe that's valid. Or if there are two ways of comparing the eternal force of, the universe, that's another way. But what if they aren't exactly the same thing, but close? So close is no cigar. This is using rationality. They look like the same thing to deceive yourself. And maybe you want to do that because it's going to solve this nagging problem. It's going to, you're going to see an end in sight if you say, well, it's two ways of comparing the mystical experience. And you can easily say, close enough. But it's not. We're dealing with base reality here. So you have to be pretty careful. And And if you are not comparing the same things, then you enter the realm of self-deception. Anyway, and related to where we're going with this, his metaphysical mountain climbing did do something. No, he did nothing for quality or the Tao. What benefited was reason. He showed a way by which reason may be expanded to include elements that may previously have been unassimilable and thus have been considered irrational. I think it's the overwhelming presence of these irrational elements crying for assimilation that creates the present bad quality, the chaotic, disconnected spirit of the 20th century. I want to go at these now as in an orderly manner as possible. So who else is defining rationality? Who did this last Friday? Thanks, Dr. John Vervaeke. And number 41 of the Meaning Crisis says basically this: that there's too much stuff to be logical about. So your rationality needs to be directed, let's just say, towards the good. But in John's words, overcoming self-deception. In other words, towards detecting quality. And is logic always the way to get there? Will logic get you to the good? Maybe sometimes, but always. Maybe realizing what's relevant is much more important. So we'll see what he's saying here. He's saying there's a bunch of leftover stuff, and that if you're not addressing the leftover stuff, you're deceiving yourself. But you will never be able to address all the stuff, as things, in a logical, rational way. There has to be another way to do it. And this is where reason has to be reconceived as not something that is going to logically tell you what everything is and where it fits into the schema. It's going to be something that orients things, that finds what's relevant in terms of the quality experience or the quality event. And also, what is the narrator describing here when he says the chaotic, disconnected spirit of the 20th century? So that's the meaning crisis. The overwhelming fragmentation we find ourselves in, and material reality that we are in now. Our unitive experience has been picked apart by logic into pieces, into fragments, and in the process killing God and killing the soul of our relationship with reality. We're on steep, mucky soil now, and it's hard to keep a footing in. We grab branches and shrubs to steady ourselves. I take a step, then figure where my next step will be, then take this step, then look again. Soon the brush becomes so thick, I see we will have to hack through it. I sit down while Chris gets the machete from the pack on my back. He hands it to me, then hacking and chopping. I head into the brush. It's slow going. 2 or 3 branches must be cut for every step. It may go on like this for a long time. So stepping down into the chaos and trying to find some order with it, hacking and chopping with the machete. Do you see how this lines up? It's a perfect description of what the narrator must do now that he's chosen not to go to the top of the mountain, carefully maneuvering through the chaos to what Phaedrus the pioneer left behind, enlisting the help of his son on a new path to hopefully build a new relationship with each other and a worldview that takes what the narrator finds useful in Phaedrus's work without inhabiting the insanity. So let's see if he can do it. The first step down from Phaedrus' statement that quality is the Buddha is a statement that such an assertion, if true, provides a rational basis for a unification of 3 areas of human experience, which are now disunited. These 3 areas are religion, art, and science. Exciting. If it can be shown that quality is the central term of all 3, and that this quality is not of many kinds, but of one kind only, then it follows that the 3 disunited areas have a basis for intro-conversion. So how can we take this mystical experience, the qualities of the Buddha, and turn it into something that can explain who we are spiritually, culturally, and intellectually? The relationship of quality to the area of art has been shown rather exhaustively through a pursuit of Phaedrus' understanding of quality in the art of rhetoric. I don't think much more in the way of analysis need be made there, as art is a high-quality endeavor that is all that really needs to be said, or if something more high-sounding is demanded, art is the Godhead as revealed in the works of man. The relationship established by Phaedrus makes it clear that the two enormously different-sounding statements are actually identified. So this is an interesting statement because it gives primary credence to the word, to the Godhead. And this means, in fact, maybe there is a parallel between quality and God, which is, of course, a big thing that I've been going through. He goes on to say, in the area of religion, the rational relationship of quality to the Godhead needs to be more thoroughly established, and I hope to do much later on. For the time being, one can meditate on the fact that the Old English roots for the Buddha and quality, God and good, appear to be identical. Again, what he's saying, it points to a much greater philosophical explanation. Obviously, this is a really tough one, and there's no answer. I mean, how could you answer that? So it has to be a point of deliberation. I don't think you will ever get to the point, honestly, is it God or is it quality? So that's really going to depend on who you are. Again, we haven't had much exploration into the area of religion in terms of what is the relationship of God to quality, but here's some similarities. They're both a monism. They're both creators of all subjects and objects, and they both orient you towards the good. In fact, they are the good. They are the same etymological root. It's in the area of science that I want to focus attention in. Oh, one thing I want to say before I go on with that. So Zam is an exploration of inquiry into values. The next book, Lila, is an inquiry into morals. And perhaps we can more go into this exploration of morality as the good when we go to the next book. In the area of science that I want to focus attention in the immediate future, for this is the area that most badly needs the relationship established. The dictum that science and its offspring technology are value-free, that it is quality-free, has got to go. It's that value freedom that underlies the death force effect to which attention was brought early in the Chautauqua. Yeah, it's the thing that needs to be addressed right away. It's the basis of the meaning crisis, as we were talking about before, and it's exactly where the conversation in this corner of the internet has been going. The notion that science is value-free and can be totally objective has been pretty much successfully challenged. I mean, why do science if it's not valuable? For what are you doing it? Why not just cross Ebola and smallpox rather than find the cure for cancer? This value freedom is that it describes that fragmentation that logic has taken us to, the death force that kills the soul of anything, that removes quality, God, good, or the Tao from the equation and leaves you with just dead matter. And we have to look at these pieces and revivify them or go back to what went wrong, to realize that, to go back to what led to all these dead pieces on the ground. That is another dynamic that you see happening, and you will, I don't want to give anything away, but you're going to see that. So they get back into town, into Bozeman, after several days of hiking. I like this. Some tourists in the lobby stare at us. With my old army clothes, walking stick, 2-day beard, and black beret, I must look like some old-time Cuban revolutionary in for a raid. Think of the photos of Pirsig and imagine that. So I hope that made sense, and I will see you next week for chapter 22.